Have you ever heard a story that begins with a single coin, yet ends with a life forever changed? A story so simple, so small at first, that you would almost miss it. But years later, it becomes the turning point of everything. This is the story of a poor woman whose kindness echoed far beyond what she could ever imagine. A woman who gave her last coin to a stranger, without knowing that one day that very act would return to her like a miracle. She was a woman whose life had been a constant struggle. Her name was Eliza. She lived in a quiet corner of a crowded city, where the walls of her tiny apartment seemed to breathe with her sadness. Paint peeled from the ceiling, the stove barely worked, and the only window she had was cracked, letting in more cold wind than sunlight. Every morning, Eliza would wake before dawn, tired and hungry, to walk across the city to her cleaning job. Her shoes were worn thin, soles patched with cardboard, and her hands had grown rough from scrubbing floors and washing windows. She earned little, barely enough to pay rent and buy a few loaves of bread for the week. But what made Eliza extraordinary was not what she had, but what she carried inside her. No matter how harsh the world treated her, she never lost her gentleness. Her neighbors, many of whom were poor themselves, often came to her door asking for sugar, a blanket, or even just a listening ear. And though Eliza had almost nothing, she shared whatever little she could. People whispered she was too soft for this world, but she believed that kindness, even when small, mattered more than people realized. It was on a freezing winter evening when everything changed. Eliza had just finished her shift, walking home under a heavy gray sky. Her thin coat did little against the biting wind, and her empty stomach groaned louder than the city buses roaring past. She had exactly one coin left in her pocket, a small silver coin that was supposed to buy her dinner. Just one loaf of bread. Nothing more, nothing less. That was all she had left for the day, and truthfully, for tomorrow too. As she walked down the narrow street, she noticed a man sitting against a wall near the corner. His clothes were ragged, his face hidden under a hood, his body shivering. A paper sign lay beside him, half covered in snow. It said only 3 words: hungry. Eliza stopped. For a moment her heart twisted. She knew hunger all too well. She knew the ache of going to sleep with nothing but water in her belly. She reached into her pocket, feeling the coin press against her fingers. 1 coin, that was all. If she gave it away, she would go without. She thought of the bread shop just 2 blocks away, where the warm smell of baked loaves would be waiting. She thought of her cold apartment, where she would sit alone with nothing to eat if she handed the coin over. Her mind battled with her heart. But then she looked again at the man. His lips were pale, his hands shaking. He looked weaker than she felt. And somehow, in that moment, she knew what she had to do. She bent down, gently pressing the coin into his palm. "It's not much," she whispered, her voice trembling with both shame and compassion. "But maybe it will help you tonight." The man looked up, and for the first time she saw his eyes. They were tired, yes, but also deep, carrying a pain she could not describe. For a brief moment their gazes locked, and though no words were spoken, something passed between them, like a silent promise that this moment would not be forgotten. The man stuttered a thank you, tears forming in his eyes. Eliza smiled softly, then walked away, her stomach heavy with emptiness, yet her heart strangely light. She told herself it was just 1 coin, just one small act, nothing more. But she could not know, not then, how much it truly meant. That night, Eliza went to bed hungry. The cold crept into her bones, and her body shivered under thin blankets. She told herself tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow she would find another way. She always did. But as she drifted into restless sleep, the face of the man she helped lingered in her mind. She wondered where he was, if he found warmth, if he found bread. And slowly her hunger faded into dreams. Years passed. Life never became easy for Eliza. She worked hard, aged quickly, and carried her struggles quietly. There were nights she had to choose between rent and food, and weeks when her shoes had more holes than leather. But through it all, she never stopped giving. Sometimes it was just a smile to a neighbor. Sometimes it was helping a child with homework. Sometimes it was sharing her last piece of bread. To her, kindness was not a luxury. It was a duty. Still, as the years slipped by, her body began to fail her. Her back bent, her hands shook, and her health grew fragile. One day, she could no longer keep her job. The building owner replaced her with someone younger, stronger, faster. With no steady income, Eliza's life turned darker. She lived off small favors, odd jobs, and the mercy of neighbors who remembered her kindness. But mercy runs thin when poverty runs deep. And soon, Eliza found herself on the edge of losing everything. It was on one of those desperate days when the weight of her world pressed hardest that her story took its most unexpected turn. She had walked to a nearby community center, hoping to find some food or even a blanket for the winter. But what she found instead was a poster on the wall. It showed the smiling face of a man, successful, confident, dressed in a sharp suit. His name was written below in bold letters, marking him as a wealthy businessman who had just returned to the city after years abroad. Eliza almost turned away, uninterested, until she saw the eyes. Those eyes. Familiar, deep, unforgettable. Her heart stopped. Could it be him? The man from years ago? The one she had given her last coin to? The memory struck her like lightning, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her hands trembled as she stared at the poster, wondering if fate could be so strange, so mysterious. She told herself it was impossible. People come and go, faces blur with time. But deep inside, a voice whispered that kindness never dies. It waits. It returns. It remembers. And she was about to find out just how powerfully it remembered. Because at that very moment, as Eliza turned from the poster, she heard footsteps behind her. A voice called out her name. A voice she had only heard once, long ago, on a snowy night, when she had pressed a coin into a stranger's hand. "Eliza?" The voice echoed softly in the quiet hallway of the community center, trembling with something between disbelief and hope. Slowly, she turned, her frail body stiff from years of struggle, her thin hands clutching the edges of her worn coat. There he was, taller now, stronger, dressed in a dark suit that seemed to shine under the lights. His hair had grown neat, his face clean and proud, but his eyes were exactly the same. Deep remembering, filled with the weight of a past moment. Neither of them had ever forgotten. Eliza's lips parted in shock. For a moment she thought her eyes were tricking her, painting illusions on a stranger's face. But then the man stepped closer, and she saw the tears glistening in his eyes. "It's you," he whispered, voice breaking. "After all these years, it's really you." Her mind raced. She tried to find words, but none came. Finally, she breathed out, her voice shaking. "The coin." The man nodded. "Yes, that coin. You gave it to me when I had nothing. I was lost, broken and starving. You didn't know me. You owed me nothing. Yet you gave me everything that night. You gave me hope." Eliza's knees weakened. The memory rushed back so vividly. She could almost feel the biting cold of that night again. She had thought it was nothing. A single coin, a tiny act of kindness, swallowed by the endless waves of time. But to him it had been a lifeline. His name, she soon learned, was Daniel. Years ago, when she found him on that snowy street, Daniel had been at the lowest point of his life. Once a young man with dreams, he had been crushed by tragedy, losing his family and falling into poverty. He wandered the city hopeless, convinced he was invisible to the world. But the coin Eliza gave him that night was not just money. It was proof that someone saw him, that someone cared. With that small spark of faith, he found the strength to rise again. He used the coin to buy bread, yes, but more than that, it reminded him of dignity. He sought help, found shelter, and slowly rebuilt his life. He worked odd jobs, studied at night, and refused to give up. The world had beaten him down, but the memory of her kindness pushed him forward. And now, years later, he had built an empire, one that stretched across nations, one that carried his name with honor. Yet through all the success, through all the wealth, he had never forgotten the woman who saved him with a coin. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "I didn't do much," she whispered. "It was only a coin." Daniel shook his head fiercely. "No, it was never just a coin, it was hope. And hope is worth more than gold." Silence fell between them, heavy with emotions too large for words. Finally, Daniel took her frail hands into his touch warm and steady. "I've searched for you," he said. "For years I asked myself if I'd ever see you again. And now that I have, Eliza, please, let me do for you what you once did for me. Let me change your life." At first, she resisted. Her pride, her years of surviving on her own, made her want to shake her head, but Daniel's gaze was unyielding, filled with the same sincerity she once showed him. Slowly she nodded, unable to fight the wave of grace returning to her. From that moment on, everything began to change. Daniel took her into his care, moving her out of the crumbling apartment into a warm home filled with light. For the first time in years, Eliza slept in a bed without holes in the blankets, ate meals without counting coins, and wore clothes that didn't carry the cold of past winters. Doctors treated her fragile health, neighbors visited with smiles, and Daniel made sure she never felt alone again. But it wasn't just about material comfort. Daniel gave her back something she thought she had lost forever: dignity. He introduced her proudly, telling people, "This woman saved me. Everything I am today is because of her." And people listened. People respected her. People who once overlooked her now bowed their heads in gratitude. Eliza often sat quietly by the window, looking at the world outside, wondering how a single coin could ripple into so much. Sometimes she cried, not from sadness, but from a deep sense of awe. And every time Daniel reminded her, "You gave me a reason to believe. Everything you see, this is all because you chose kindness." Years rolled by, but now they were years of peace, not struggle. Eliza grew older, her hair silver like moonlight, but her heart lighter than it had ever been. And Daniel, though busy with his empire, always made time for her. He never missed a single dinner, never missed a chance to sit by her side and talk about life, about hope, about the night that changed everything. One evening, as the golden light of sunset streamed through the windows, Eliza asked him softly, "Daniel, why do you still care so much? You have everything now. You don't owe me anything." Daniel looked at her with eyes shining, the same way they had that snowy night. "Because you didn't owe me anything either. Yet you gave. And when someone saves your life, no amount of years or riches can erase the debt of gratitude." Her heart swelled, her eyes brimming with tears. She realized then that life was not measured by wealth or power, but by the love we give, the kindness we choose, even when no one is watching. She had given a coin, but in truth she had given something far greater. A seed of hope that grew into a forest of blessings. Eliza passed away peacefully some years later, in a warm bed, surrounded not by loneliness but by people who cherished her. Daniel held her hand until her final breath, whispering, "You will never be forgotten, not by me, not by the world." And true to his word, Daniel honored her memory in a way that would last forever. He built a foundation in her name, dedicated to helping the poor, the hungry, the forgotten, those who needed just one act of kindness to find hope again. On the plaque outside the foundation's doors were engraved words that shone like silver. One coin can change a life. One kindness can change the world. And so the story of a poor woman and her last coin became more than just a memory. It became a legacy, a reminder that no matter how small our actions may seem, they carry the power to echo through time, to heal, to lift, to transform lives in ways we may never see. Because in the end, kindness never dies. It waits. It returns. And sometimes it comes back to us in ways more beautiful than we could ever imagine.